Most men have been complimenting women their entire lives and getting it completely wrong, not because they're saying the wrong words, but because they don't understand what a compliment actually does inside someone's mind. Here's something nobody talks about. The average compliment, the one most men default to, doesn't create attraction. It actually creates distance. And the strange part, the man giving it usually thinks it went well. He thinks he's being kind, thoughtful, even charming. But she walks away feeling nothing, or worse, slightly uncomfortable. And he has no idea why. There's a small group of men who figured something out, not through manipulation or rehearsed lines, but through a genuine understanding of how emotional experience actually works. These men give compliments that land differently, compliments that stay with a woman for days, that she thinks about when she's alone, that she tells her friends about. And here's what's interesting: those men aren't necessarily the most attractive, they're not always the most successful, but they understand something about the human psyche that changes everything. Today, we're going to talk about what that is. This video isn't about pickup lines. It's not a list of things to say to trick someone into liking you. I want to be clear about that up front because that kind of content exists everywhere and it fundamentally misunderstands what attraction is. What we're going to talk about today is grounded in real psychology, specifically research around emotional recognition, intrinsic validation, and how the brain encodes meaningful experiences versus forgettable ones. There's a difference between a compliment that makes someone feel seen and a compliment that makes someone feel evaluated. And once you understand that distinction, you'll never approach this the same way again. By the end of this video, you'll understand 8 specific types of compliments and, more importantly, why they work. You'll understand the psychological mechanism behind each one. And there's one insight toward the end of this video around the 8th compliment that I think is going to genuinely shift how you see all of this. Stay with me. Let me describe something you've probably experienced. You meet a woman you're genuinely interested in. Maybe she's funny or sharp, or there's just something about the way she carries herself. And at some point in the conversation, you want her to know you're interested. So you say something. Maybe it's, "You're really beautiful," or "You're so smart," or "I love your style." And she smiles, maybe says, "Thank you." And the conversation just moves on. Nothing happened, no shift in energy, no deepening of connection, just a polite exchange, and then you're both back to wherever you were emotionally. Here's why. That kind of compliment, however sincere, is what psychologists call an evaluative statement. You're essentially saying, "I looked at you, I assessed you, and you passed." And the subtle emotional signal that sends is actually one of judgment, of appraisal, which means, however unintentionally, you've positioned yourself as the judge and her as the one being evaluated. Most men don't realize this. They think they're being generous, and they are. They genuinely mean it, but the emotional experience it creates in her is very different from the emotional experience they intended. The other problem is frequency and genericness. "You're beautiful" is something she's heard probably a lot. It doesn't tell her anything about you. It doesn't tell her anything specific about her. It's essentially a demographic observation. She's heard it from men who were obsessed with her, and men who would have said the same thing to anyone in the room. So it doesn't mean much. Not because she's cold or ungrateful, but because the human brain is wired to discount information that isn't novel, specific, or emotionally resonant. And that's the gap between what most men say and what actually creates connection. Let's close it. Before we get into the 8 compliments, I want to walk you through 3 psychological principles. These are the foundation. The 8 compliments only make sense and only work when you understand what's underneath them. Trigger 1, the difference between validation and recognition. Most compliments are validation. Recognition is something else entirely. Validation says, "You're good." Recognition says, "I noticed something in you." Here's the psychological distinction. Validation activates the part of the brain that processes approval, the reward circuitry, the same pathway that lights up with social acceptance. It feels good momentarily, but it doesn't create attachment. It doesn't create depth. It fades. Recognition does something different. Recognition activates what psychologists call felt understanding, the sense that another person has genuinely perceived you. And that is one of the deepest human needs. Not to be liked, not to be told you're attractive, but to be seen. When a woman feels genuinely seen by someone, that person becomes significant to her. Not because she's dependent or needy, but because felt understanding is rare. Most social interaction is surface level. We're all performing versions of ourselves constantly. And when someone cuts through that performance and actually sees you, not your looks, not your status, not your social role, it creates an emotional imprint that is hard to shake. The first category of compliments we're going to talk about today are all recognition based. They're not about saying, you're great. They're about saying, I noticed this about you specifically, and it means something. This is why specificity is everything. Specificity is a generic compliment cannot produce felt understanding. By definition, something generic cannot be about you. The more specific a compliment is, the more clearly it signals, I was actually paying attention. Trigger two, emotional safety as the precondition for attraction. Here's a belief that almost every man has at some level. That attraction is about generating excitement, energy, chemistry, that you need to create a spark, be interesting enough, dynamic enough, impressive enough. And there's some truth to that. Novelty and confidence do matter. But here's what that belief misses. For most women, attraction deepens primarily through emotional safety, not stimulation. This isn't a generalization about gender. It's rooted in how threat assessment and attachment actually work in the brain. When someone feels safe with you, genuinely safe, not managed or performed, but actually safe, their nervous system opens. Their guard drops. And when a person's guard drops, they become capable of experiencing emotions much more vividly, including attraction. The problem with most men's approach to compliments is that they inadvertently reduce emotional safety, either because the compliment feels like a setup for something, like it comes with expectation attached, or because it's so focused on physical appearance that it subtly signals, I'm primarily interested in your exterior. Neither of those creates safety. The compliments that build emotional safety are the ones that communicate, I'm interested in you, not in what you can give me, not in how you look and who you actually are. That signal delivered consistently and genuinely is disarming in the best possible way. We'll talk about exactly how to do this. Trigger three, the rarest thing. Being celebrated, not just approved of this, is the one I want you to really sit with, because I think it's the most important insight in this entire video. There's a difference between being approved of and being celebrated. Approval is conditional. It's a verdict. You did well, you look good, you're impressive, it's a thumbs up or thumbs down. And whether the verdict is positive or negative, the dynamic is the same. One person is in the position of judge, the other is subject to judgment. Celebration is completely different. Celebration says the fact that this quality exists in you makes me happy. Not because it benefits me, not because it passes my standard, but just because it is. It's almost closer to delight than approval. And here's the psychological reality. Most people, men and women, have very rarely been truly celebrated. Complimented, yes. Approved of, yes. But genuinely celebrated for something real and specific about who they are, that is rare. When you give that to someone, when a woman feels genuinely celebrated by you, not just approved of, the emotional response is profound. It bypasses the part of her brain that's skeptical of compliments, that's wondering about your motives, that's evaluating whether you mean it. Because celebration doesn't feel strategic. It feels like a gift. And that's the highest level of this skill. Not saying the right things, but genuinely cultivating the kind of presence and attention that makes real celebration possible. Keep that in mind as we go through these 8. Compliment 1, the specific observation compliment. This is the entry point, the foundation. Instead of saying, you're really funny, which is evaluative and generic, you say something like, the way you told that story just now, where you paused right before the punchline, I don't think you even realized you did that, but it was perfect. Notice what happened there. You didn't just evaluate her, you observed her. You caught a micro detail that she probably wasn't even consciously aware of. And in doing so, you communicated something powerful. I am paying full attention to you, not performing attention, actually present. The psychological impact of this is significant. She now knows that you see her more clearly than most people do. And that creates a kind of intimacy, not romantic intimacy necessarily, but the intimacy of being truly witnessed, which is where all deeper connection begins. The rule here is simple. Never give a compliment you couldn't have given to a different woman. The more irreplaceably specific it is to her, the more weight it carries. Compliment two, the quality behind the quality compliment. This one requires a bit more depth, but it's worth developing. Most compliments address what's visible. The quality behind the quality compliment names the character trait that produces the visible thing. So instead of "you're really driven," you might say there's something in the way you talk about your work. It's not ambition exactly. It's more like you actually care whether the thing gets done right. That's rarer than people think. What you've done there is named something beneath the surface. You've looked past the visible characteristic and identified what generates it. The thing underneath the thing. Women, people in general, spend enormous amounts of time and energy performing characteristics they think others want to see. When someone compliments that performance, it's pleasant but shallow. When someone names the source, the actual character quality underneath, it feels like being seen at a cellular level, like someone looked past your face and noticed something real. This is the compliment that makes people go quiet for a moment. The one that produces that brief pause before they respond because it catches them off guard in the best way. They weren't expecting to be understood that precisely. Compliment three, the growth or change. Compliment. This one only works if you know someone at least a little, or if you're observant within a longer conversation. It sounds like this. I notice how you talk about that differently now than you did at the beginning of this conversation. Like something shifted, or if you know her over time, I remember when that used to make you anxious. The way you just handled it, there's something different there. The psychological principle here is something called developmental recognition, the acknowledgement that a person has grown, changed, or evolved, that they are not static. Most people are never recognized for their growth. They're celebrated for their fixed attributes. You're smart, you're beautiful, but almost never for the work they've done internally to become who they are, to change a pattern, to move through fear, to choose differently than they used to. When you notice that, when you say, "I see that you've grown here," you honor the process, not just the outcome. And that communicates something profound. I see you as a person in motion, not a collection of fixed traits, which is one of the most humanizing things one person can offer another. Compliment four, the undefended truth. Compliment. This one is subtle, and it requires confidence to deliver. But done right, it's extremely powerful. The undefended truth compliment is when you say something true about her that she can't easily deflect. Something that doesn't give her social room to say, "Oh, thanks, you're so kind." Because it's too specific, too accurate, too clearly not flattery. Something like, "You're actually more decisive than you let on. You had your opinion within 30 seconds, but you waited to see if anyone else was going to say it first." She can't really deflect that because it's not a general compliment. It's a precise observation. And the moment she realizes you're right, there's a small shock of being seen, which is followed by a natural pull toward you because our brains instinctively orient toward people who understand us accurately. The key here is that it's delivered without any need for her to respond in a particular way. You're not saying it for her validation. You're saying it because you noticed it. That self-sufficiency is what makes it land cleanly. Compliment five, the contextual courage compliment. This one is specifically about honoring vulnerability or courage in real time. When someone shares something difficult, when someone disagrees with the group, when someone admits a fear or a mistake, those moments usually pass without comment because it's socially awkward to acknowledge them directly. Most people either ignore it or respond with generic, that so brave energy that somehow feels worse than silence. But here's what a quiet, grounded compliment in that moment sounds like. "That took something to say. I want you to know I heard it." Or most people don't say that out loud. "I respect that you did." Nothing elaborate, nothing effusive, just a clear, calm acknowledgement that you saw the courage in the moment and that you honor it. The reason this creates such strong connection is that vulnerability is terrifying. Every time someone is genuinely vulnerable, not performed vulnerability, but real exposure, there's a part of them waiting to be punished for it, waiting for the dismissal or the awkward silence or the redirection. When instead someone acknowledges it with warmth and steadiness, the relief is enormous and the person who provided that relief becomes deeply significant. This is emotional safety at its most concrete. You are literally becoming the person who makes her feel safe to be real. And there is almost nothing more attractive than that. Compliment six, the you don't know how rare this is compliment. This one is about helping someone understand the significance of something they take for granted about themselves. We all have qualities we've lived with so long that they feel ordinary to us. Things that come naturally, our way of thinking, our values, how we treat people that we don't recognize as unusual because we've never not had them. And when someone comes along and says, you know that thing you just did, where you noticed how that person at the other table was feeling and adjusted without them having to say anything. I need you to understand that most people cannot do that. That's not normal. That's something. What happens in that moment is called reframing intrinsic value. You're not giving her new information about herself. You're changing the context in which she holds existing information. And that can be genuinely reveille. She's thought of herself as just perceptive or just caring. You're helping her see it as remarkable. The condition for this compliment is that it has to be true. This cannot be manufactured. If you're genuinely paying attention to people, you will notice real things about them that they underestimate. Your job isn't to invent these things, it's to recognize them and then have the presence of mind to say so. Compliment seven, the compliment delivered to someone else. This is the one most people never think of, and it might be the most psychologically sophisticated on this list. You tell someone else, a mutual friend, a person in the group, even just reference it in the context of a later conversation, something genuinely true and complimentary about her. She's the kind of person who remembers things that actually matter about people. She mentioned something you said 3 months ago that you probably forgot you told her. When this gets back to her, and it usually does, the impact is unlike anything a direct compliment can produce because it was not said for her benefit. It was said when she wasn't even present, which means there was no performance in it, no angle. It was just the truth about how you see her expressed naturally. The research on this is clear. We trust information far more when it wasn't directed at us. We discount direct flattery at an instinctive level because compliments to our face could always be social performance. But something said behind our back, that's revealing. Use this carefully and genuinely, not as a tactic, but as an extension of actually thinking well of her and being willing to express it in the world, not just to her face. Compliment eight, the compliment that costs you something. This is the one I told you to hold on to. And I want to spend some extra time here because this is where everything we've talked about comes together. Every compliment we've discussed so far involves observation, noticing something real and expressing it. But this one requires something different. It requires disclosure. The compliment that costs you something is when expressing what you notice about her requires you to be momentarily vulnerable yourself. When acknowledging her quality means revealing something true about you in the process. It might sound like this. Honestly, talking to you is uncomfortable in a good way. You ask questions I don't have easy answers to. I haven't thought this carefully in a while. Or you're one of the few people I've met who actually changes my mind in real time. That's unsettling. And I mean that as the highest compliment I know how to give, or even something quieter. I don't say this to people easily, but you make it easy to be honest. Notice what's happening in all of these. You are not just naming something you admire in her, you are allowing her to see that it affects you, that it reaches you, that you are not behind glass while you observe her, that you are actually in the room, actually moved by what you see. This is the rarest kind of compliment because it requires a man who is secure enough in himself to be momentarily open, who doesn't need to maintain the performance of constant composure, who can say, this person moves me and I'm not afraid to say so. And here's the psychological reality. We fall for people who let us affect them, not people who are affected by everything, not emotionality for its own sake, but people who are selectively moved by what is genuinely moving. When a grounded, composed man lets it show that you specifically have gotten through to him, the impact is enormous because it confirms that what you saw in him was real. He wasn't performing. He was present and you reached him. That is the full circle of everything we've been building toward. Not compliments as tools, not phrases as techniques, but the kind of presence and genuine attention that makes real compliments possible. And then having the confidence and warmth to actually say them out loud. Let me bring this down to earth for a second. None of this requires you to have a script. In fact, the moment you're working from a script, you've already lost the thing that makes all of this work, which is genuine presence. What it does require is attention. Most of us go through social interactions with about 30% of our attention actually on the other person. The rest is on how we're coming across, what to say next, what they might be thinking of us. And that fragmented attention is exactly why most compliments feel hollow, because they're produced by a mind that isn't fully there. So before you work on what to say, work on actually showing up. Slow down. When she's talking, listen without preparing your response. Let there be silence when silence is honest. Look for the things that are actually interesting about her because they are there in everyone. If you're paying attention, the compliments that land are almost always born out of a moment of genuine noticing. You weren't trying to impress her, you just saw something and you decided to say it. That's the entire practice. In terms of delivery, calm and grounded is always the right register. Not intense, not effusive, not waiting for her reaction before you feel confident in what you said. You say it because it's true. You don't need her to validate your observation for the observation to be real. That self-sufficiency, that sense that you're not saying it to get something back, is what separates a compliment that creates connection from one that creates pressure. Pressure closes people. Safety opens them. Everything here is in service of the latter. I want to take 30 seconds on this because I think it matters. Nothing in this video is a technique for making someone feel something they don't genuinely feel. If the connection isn't there, these compliments won't manufacture it and they shouldn't. What they will do is allow real connection when it exists to deepen and be expressed in ways that actually reach another person. The goal is not to engineer attraction. The goal is to stop getting in the way of it. Most men don't fail because there's no genuine interest between them and a woman. They fail because they can't communicate in a way that creates emotional resonance. They default to social scripts that produce nothing, and real potential connection gets buried under generic, forgettable interaction. These 8 compliments are about undoing that, about learning to translate what you actually see and feel into language that lands, that reaches someone the way it deserves to. That's it. That's the whole project. If any of this is useful to you, there's one thing I'd actually encourage you to try this week. Not as homework, but as an experiment. The next time you're in a conversation with someone you genuinely respect or find interesting, see if you can catch one specific thing about them that they probably don't realize you noticed. Just notice it. You don't even have to say it yet. Just practice the observation because the saying it part, the actual compliment, is only ever as good as the attention behind it. Start there. Everything else builds from that. And if you want to go deeper on this, on the psychology of attraction, emotional intelligence, presence, the kind of inner work that actually changes how you show up, subscribe. There's a lot more to cover, and I want to do it with the same level of care and honesty that I hope came through in this video. Let me leave you with this. The reason most compliments fail isn't because they're insincere. It's because they come from the outside in. They start with a standard beauty, intelligence, success, and then measure the person against it. And, however favorably, they deliver a verdict. What we've been talking about today is something that moves in the opposite direction. It starts with the person with who she actually is in this specific conversation, in this specific moment, and it moves outward from there toward language that tries to match what's real. That's a fundamentally different thing. Not a compliment as transaction, a compliment as a gift given because you saw something worth seeing, not because you wanted something in return. And here's what I believe genuinely. When you become someone who pays that kind of attention, not as a strategy, but as a way of being in the world, everything changes. Not just how you connect with women, how you connect with everyone, how you move through life, because attention is love in its most basic form. And people can feel the difference between being looked at and being truly seen. Be someone who sees. That's the whole thing. If this landed for you, drop a comment. Tell me which of the 8 hit closest to home, or share something you've been getting wrong that you're going to do differently.